going to our final talk of the day, our final fireside chat of the day, I want to say, in our closing session of Techsylvania 2023 with Ryan Sarver, a seasoned technology and venture capital professionalist, and Karolina Mrotzkova, general partner at Credo Ventures. Ryan has over 2 decades of experience in the tech industry, having served as Twitter's 30th employee and later as a general partner at Redpoint Ventures. As an angel investor, he has made significant investments in many companies that you know, like Figma and Shield AI. Karolina has herself extensive experience in venture capital and entrepreneurship, having co-founded a successful startup and served as a general partner at Credo Ventures, where she focuses on early stage investments in Central and Eastern Europe. So you can get some money from her, most likely. And in the session, Ryan and Karolina will share their insights on lessons on scaling successful technology companies and navigating the venture capital industry. Please give them all a warm welcome to Techsylvania, and thank you.
Thanks for sticking with us.
Last session of the conference. We'll try and bring the energy, keep everyone going, and not stand too far to the drinks.
Exactly. So we have Ryan here. As you know, the intro's already been done, but Ryan was at Twitter. He was the 30th employee there. He was there for over 4 years, and then he switched sides of the table, became a partner at Redpoint. And to be honest, I'm not gonna probably do the best, justice to his full story. So if you could, introduce yourself and just walk us through the whole, decades of your experience in tech.
Yeah, I'll try and make the background quick, but it's a probably non-traditional path. So I, taught myself programming in kind of high school and into college. Got into college originally playing ice hockey and realized I really didn't enjoy the educational structure and wanted to break out on my own. I'd really gotten into technology and programming, broke out and worked at a bunch of startups around the Boston area for a bunch of years. None of those kind of venture backed until the end. And there's one called Skyhook Wireless that did Wi-Fi and cell tower triangulation. And that really small company got a call one day from a guy named Steve Jobs, who left a voicemail about an iPhone that he was building and wanted to license our technology to power location on the iPhone. It's a whole another session for another day, but an amazing experience. And then from that, my job was to go kind of figure out all the Web 2.0 companies and help get location into those companies. There was a company at the time called Odeo, which was a podcasting network. We're back in like 2005. They was started by Ev Williams. That eventually turned into Twitter, and so I got to know the team through that. And after me harassing them for many years to try and use our technology, they were like, "Why don't you just come work here instead of harassing us? We can't keep the servers on each day." So went to Twitter, and we'll talk more about the experience there, and then left and joined Redpoint, even though I never thought I'd be an investor. So it's a little bit of a different path into both the companies, but an amazing journey.
Yeah, that is for sure. You joined Twitter very early on, and you saw the company grow from 30 to 3,000 people, right? Obviously Twitter became one of the major social media networks. Can you tell us what happened to the company? How did it transform from, a tiny team and a product that, by the way, the product also transformed in crazy ways. Mm-hmm. What happened? What led to the success? It wasn't potentially just luck, right? There were other competitors at that time. So, tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, and we were talking about this a little bit before of what made Twitter break out versus the others. And I think this is partially what makes investing in social companies so hard, because it's kind of lightning in a bottle. It's a little bit of alchemy. There's no clear-cut thing that makes them all break out. I think Twitter was this, at a time when mobile was really starting to take off, SMS was starting to be really widely available, and the idea of the follow graph was different than the Facebook one, which is more kind of family and close friends. This was about this kind of one-to-many set of relationships. Could be athletes or friends or celebrities or reporters, brands, whatever. And that mix was a really different thing. And so that alchemy was kind of just what struck a chord with people and went on its own. And so, a lot of times we kind of didn't know. Things would just work and they would go and take off. And we were trying to be thoughtful around things like retweets, but a lot of the features were actually built by users of the service. The hashtag was built by someone who's users of the service. Retweet was a thing. It used to be RT space username and then the content, and we turned that into a feature. So a lot of it was just kind of watching how people use this like kind of really core platform and then folding those features in. But I think the part that to me was so new and unique, I'd never thought about organizational structure. Like, how does a company scale? How do you reorganize? And I joined at 30, and we have it organized in a certain way, but at like 50 people, that structure stopped working. And then we'd reorganize, and at 150, that would totally fall apart again, and you have to restructure. And that was just kind of this continual experience that everything you think you know today is just going to change again soon. And so you have to hire in people who are very comfortable with that. We had some failure early by hiring in some kind of seasoned Google people at the time, and it was just too chaotic for them. They were super used already at that time to having a lot of structure and a lot of team around them. And I think it's a good lesson for young companies. Be very careful of hiring what seems like the shiny object from a big branded company, because they might have a lot of experience and infrastructure around them in one setting, but if you bring them down to your kind of chaotic, messy startup, they might not be able to work in the same way.
Yeah. And what were sort of the do's and the don'ts of the operation? In terms of hiring, in terms of building the product, and all sort of sides of the business.
Yeah. So he hit on a point before this, and it was Levi, I think, who was up here. Culture was super, super important to the company, and I think one lesson I took away from it was culture is something that you have to create. It does come from the CEO, comes from the person who embodies it the most, but you have to really force it and talk about it a lot, because it doesn't just happen on its own, especially when a company is in that kind of hyperscale mode. You need to be really thoughtful about it, and if you wait too long, it's already kind of metastasizes into its own thing. And so be thoughtful about it early, sit down and really think about what those core values are. And I think Levi said a little bit, we always thought about them as things that we want to be able to make decisions. Like if we're trying to decide versus A versus B, could we go through our core values, and that would help us decide sometimes between those things. And if it didn't really help you decide, then it just isn't really valuable to the company. So we always try to use that as kind of guiding structural principles in how we operated. So I think culture was really important. I think communication was a kind of a surprising one. When you're in a smaller team, it's really easy to sit and kind of communicate, here's our direction, here's what's important to us right now. But as the company grows and grows, you have to communicate messages until you're nauseous from talking about it. Like you're so tired of saying the same thing over and over. Because when the company gets big, it takes a long time for those messages to make their way all the way through the system. And so it's really important to be clear, have real clarity of what you're communicating, what we're working on, why is it important, and then keep repeating that down into the organization. I think there was, again, an observation for me, because I wasn't the CEO, but watching, Ev was the first CEO when I was there, and eventually Dick was the next CEO. But for both of them, I would watch teams not take information to them, because there's a fear of, I think, bringing information further up into the executives that might be, bad news or whatever. And so I think Dick did a really good job when he saw this and the company was growing to do what he called skip level meetings. So make sure he went deeper into the organization to really ask about what's not working. And I know within my own team, I'd say we need to embrace the suck. What is not working? Because if we don't hear it from our own team or we don't hear it from our developers, there's no way we can fix it. So we got to go out and hunt for that information, because it's not always going to come to us on our own. So I think from a culture and structural standpoint, I think those were really uniquely well done, I think, at Twitter. On the product side, I think one that I really took away from it was, and this is probably more to what I'd say consumer or engagement-based businesses, less infrastructure. But if you're thinking an engagement-based business, we would try and find what are the cohorts of people that are really engaged in this platform. They're engaging a lot, they're sticky, that cohort sticks around forever. Analyze that cohort and really find out what makes them unique. In the Twitter world, we found having a great timeline was really important, kind of obvious, but what does that mean? And we found if they followed 20 asymmetrical follows, like celebrity, news organization, athlete, whatever, so they'd follow them one directional but not two, and then kind of 10 bi-directional ones, that was a really good, we call it kind of atomic unit of engagement. If we could get a user to that state, they were deeply engaged in the platform and would stick around for a long time, which then means you try to reorient everything you can to try and get a user to that state. Unfortunately for Twitter, and kind of as the story of the company, it's really hard to do. Asking people what they're interested in is really difficult. So I don't feel like we ever really kind of cracked that very well. And I think TikTok has now shown this idea of if you just give people great content right away and let the algorithm drive it from the beginning, it's less about following and more about just delivering great experiences from a cold start. And that, in a right world, can do really well. I think it's a little harder with text than it is with media as a format. And I think Elon's trying to kind of work on that a little bit. But I think that was a thing we didn't do a great job of, but we understood it. And for the people that we could get to that state, it worked really well.
Yeah. So maybe back to the culture point. So obviously, like, when you're 30 people, you still recognize everyone, they're your friends. I guess at the point, like 100 people, you're already like, who's this person, who's that person? There's new people every day. Like, how do you scale culture, right? How do you keep that secret? Like, a couple of our founders in our portfolio, we had this discussion quite recently. It was like, I don't know how to keep the magic. It's really hard, and it's something that really powered the team from at the beginning. And maybe the answer is going to be you can't scale that, but I wonder if you guys manage.
I think you can. Yeah, I think you can. I mean, you see big organizations, Google, Facebook, Apple, Salesforce, that you can go in and you can feel a different culture at each place. And in the end, I think the culture has to be native to the founder or the CEO, because if it's too disconnected and you're trying to kind of parrot that thing, it's really hard to embody it, and therefore you get this kind of disconnect. So it has to be representation of how you actually run the company. But then it's tactical things, like we'd have our Friday, we call them TGIF, it was a tea time essentially on Friday, but late afternoon, Friday evening, where we'd put up the slides and we'd start with the values and the principles, and we'd highlight people that embodied the principles. So it's just kind of this like drumbeat constantly of reminding people what they are and how to operate with them, how to make decisions based on them. When someone would do something great in the company, they would embody one of the things, we'd highlight that person. So it takes work. Like, it's not something that you just kind of put up on a poster and let sit there and hope that everyone remembers it. You got to like really deeply embed it in the company, and then you also have to live it. You have to like keep reminding people of how to go live by those values throughout the operation of the company. Yeah.
And to the product point, I mean, you left Twitter. How many users were there?
That was. The graph for Twitter was always kind of like this, early, slower start in the beginning. Started around 2007 was the spin out from Odeo, and then just went through that kind of meteoric rise. And then I remember towards the end of my time there, we were kind of at 300 million users, and it just was like sputtering out. You could see this kind of S-curve happening. And at the time, I don't know what the numbers would be now, but 1.2 billion people had already tried Twitter, and the 900 million of them had decided not to come back. Yeah. And I remember thinking at the time, that's going to be really, really hard to reconvince people, especially with like a product like Twitter. It's like they'd come in, they're like, I don't know what to tweet. I can't build a good graph. Or, I can't build a good, they would even think it was a graph, but I can't find a good timeline. And they just kind of leave, and then those tweets would show up on the news or, in New York Times or something anyway. And so we always felt like there was a huge audience for Twitter, but we couldn't capture them as like full-time engaged users all the time. And I think it's a little bit of a failure in the company to do a better job of delivering value to people, but it's also just a byproduct of the way the public content works. We didn't want to lock down content so that only logged in users could see it. We wanted that content to kind of fly outside of the borders of the business, and it inherently means it's harder to monetize and it's harder to kind of keep that engaged audience. But I think it was around 300 million at the time, and it's still kind of around 300 million now. I think they focus more on daily engaged users or something. They use a different metric now. But.
Okay, yeah, but it seems like obviously they were one of the first social networks, and yet they kind of missed the train on a lot of things, right? I mean, Instagram came, or Facebook first, Instagram came, and Snapchat, and now TikTok. What happened, right? There were some stories that happened along the way where like they tried, maybe jump on some of those trends, were late, or
Yeah, there is, I'm going to lose track of the years, but right around, everyone knew as Instagram getting acquired by Facebook, but we have been watching internally at Twitter for years of like, we have text content, and we had a company called TwitPic that would allow us to kind of post photos out to Twitter, but as a third-party company that we'd kind of natively post photos, show the photos in the timeline. And we could see like Instagram taking off in our internal metrics, and they would post to Twitter to like grab users and send them back over to Instagram. And I remember even we were telling celebrities at the time that were like too nervous about what to tweet. We're like, just post a photo. Photos are like much easier. You don't really have to be witty. It's just something you can share. And I wouldn't say the light never fully clicked on for us, but we never went so aggressively after photos as we should have at the time to go build it internally. But we did go aggressively after Instagram, and a part of the story that's not as well told anymore, we had actually made the first offer to Instagram to acquire them at the time. I think there were like 13 employees. And I think we offered something like 500 million to bring them in. Unfortunately, Mark found out about it. Still unclear exactly how that happened, but we have a few ideas. And he took them for a walk around his house and offered them $1 billion on the spot, and they took that deal. So I think it would have been a potentially different outcome for Twitter if we'd been able to get them in. But that was a big loss for us and a big gain for Facebook. Because Instagram was an amazing platform. Mikey and Kevin were like good friends, and we had worked with them for years. So sad to see them kind of go over to the other side, but it was a sad loss.
Yeah, for sure. So, and then obviously you left 4 years later, kind of just before the IPO, and decided to go into venture. How did that happen?
Yeah. Joining as early as I did there, I really enjoyed the early stages of the company. Like I always kind of felt like I enjoyed the 30-person thing a lot more than the 3,000-person thing. And Elon kind of famously has really stripped the company down. But I remember even as I left, one of the other big mistakes I think Twitter made, they watched Google and they watched Facebook go and just hire infinite talent. Like every talented person those two companies could get, they would bring them on board. And Twitter had a bunch of ex kind of Google people, and we also kind of watched what they had been doing. And the problem was, or the benefit for them is those two companies had two of the best business models and big businesses ever created. Google would add Gmail and Google Maps and Google Workplace, and they kept adding more surface area to keep bringing those people onto. Facebook, similarly, they kept adding new features, and Twitter was always still this kind of constrained, simple product, and yet we kept throwing more people under the umbrella. And so towards the end of my time there, it just felt it was too many people in too small of a space, which then creates politics and creates infighting, because you bring in a ton of ambitious people without enough surface area for things to go work on. And so you could just kind of feel the politics already starting around that time. And for me, I knew it was not where I'm going to thrive. I wanted to get back to doing something smaller. And I originally left there planning to go start a business. I had a few ideas I really wanted to go work on, but I was so PTSD from the time there that I was like, I need to go clear some time out. But I'd gotten to know a bunch of VCs through that role, and I was like, I'd never raised money on my own. I thought, what do VCs even talk about after a founder makes a pitch and leaves the room? Like, how do they value a company? Let me go sit with them, see great pitches. I'll kind of bring my network of friends along for potential investments and kind of learn about the business, and then I'll leave to go start a company. So I hung out with Redpoint mostly that summer, and towards the end of the summer, they said, would you like to join as a general partner? Which again, in the venture world, around that time was when the shift started happening from kind of more traditional venture backgrounds, where someone was coming from finance, probably Stanford Business School, and maybe from Harvard Business School, but it was a very tightly controlled group that would get into venture, and they're starting to realize that operators and kind of non-traditional business school people could come in. So Redpoint was formed in around 2000 with it was two other firms, the people that were working on internet investing, joined together to launch the fund. It was obviously a terrible time to launch it. They went through kind of the trough of sorrow for the next kind of 4 or 5 years. And that group of investors, that original founding group, was an amazing group, but the model had changed in venture, right? The deals were changing, the way you invested, the ownership you got for the dollars you put in was just changing. And so when I started hanging out with them, there was another partner who'd already joined, a guy named Satish Dharmaraj, who was a multi-time founder, just amazing guy, and he was the first person in who was kind of this new crop. And he then brought me in, and at least a couple of brought me people in, but that generational transition is really, really important in venture funds. And as a founder thinking of fundraising, it is important to really understand the dynamics of the funds that you're talking to. Who's the partner? Are they growing in control? Are they waning? It's something that's really important to understand, because it helps both in making sure that they'll be a good champion for you and what their future at the fund is going to be. So it's important to kind of understand the dynamics there. But yeah, honestly, I thought I was going to do it for maybe a year or two and learn the business a little bit and then leave to go start the business. But I really started enjoying it. I love the intellectual curiosity to meet a bunch of different founders and see different businesses and learn about grocery one day and then on-demand delivery in restaurants and then robotics. And so that part was really intellectually stimulating for me. And I think, my background, when I moved to San Francisco in 2009. It was an amazing time to be there because everyone was working on cool stuff. Uber was getting started. They were good friends. The Instagram guys were good friends, WordPress. But it was just everyone that was there. And so it was just by luck of being there, we were talking about luck earlier, it was just a great time and great place. So it was nice to join at that time, and there was enough interesting stuff, but it was also a weird time to be doing consumer. Because I think a lot of the on-demand businesses were already kind of past. Social was already kind of like leaving the gate. Snapchat was already further ahead. So it was an interesting time to be doing consumer investing.
Yeah. And you guys, I mean, during your time there, you guys were super successful, right? Like you invested in, I had to write it down because there's a lot of them. There's Snowflake, Stripe, Zendesk, Twilio, DraftKings. You personally invested in Hims, Telegram, Flume, Figma.
Yeah.
And there's obviously a lot of the successes which we usually hear about, and then there's a lot of mistakes. And especially when you come into venture, you kind of learn through those. What were some of those, and what did you learn? And also, you were the first partner who really kind of went onto the consumer stuff, right? So you didn't even have anyone to maybe from other companies, but didn't have anyone to bounce ideas off of. So you had to do it on your own.
Yeah, and it's a big transition going from operating to venture. And I think I thought, all these things I've learned about ecosystem and business development and sales and engineering are going to be this easily transferable thing, and almost none of that is helpful in a venture. It helps in kind of your ability to network and go find companies, but your ability to assess a company, win that deal, and support that company, those things don't really help. And as an operator, I always say, you kind of know what you need to do. Like, you have the list. You just don't have enough time in your day, your week, your month to get through it. So the anxiety is one of, did I get enough done? But you can kind of like attack it and put more time in and get through it. Venture, it's not about the inputs. It's only about the outputs. And the outputs don't come back for 7 years. Or in the good cases, they come back in 7 years. The failures come back pretty quickly. So for me, it was really disorienting and hard to kind of calibrate for a while. Because your first investments, the ones that fail, come in much sooner. So all of a sudden you're like, I suck at this. Like, oh my God, I feel like I'm doing the right stuff. I'm seeing great companies, and I'm seeing other people succeed around me. But my first few deals were ones that just kind of quickly, crashed down. There was one in the U.S. called Secret. That was an anonymous social network. We co-led the B with Index. I think it was like a $20 million Series B, and the metrics when we looked at it were like unbelievable. Like incredible retention, incredible engagement. Usage was growing. They were #1 in tons of countries, like number 6 in the US. But the wheels fell off that one so quickly. I remember I signed the term sheet when I was at the hospital having my son, and 9 months later they were giving money back because they're like, oh my God, this was so hard. The wheels came off really hard. So that's hard, because to go champion with your partnership a $20 million deal, $10 million from us, out of a $400-some million early stage fund was a big check, and they supported me really well in it. But that's a hard lesson to take early, and then still get up the next day, take more meetings, and still be like willing to go out there and write more checks. So it takes perseverance, I think, or just kind of staying focused on what you think is going to be right, knowing that failures are going to come in soon, but the successes may come in later. We don't know.
Yeah. And I guess the last question potentially, I guess a lot of founders in the room, VC tends to be a little bit of a black box from the outside, right? Like you don't know how to approach them. Like as you said, like the partnership dynamics, like how do they make decisions together? What are they looking for in an investment? Can you maybe talk about some of those things? How you operate it at Redpoint?
Yeah, and I think having been on the other side of it, on the kind of operating side, I feel like I had a different lens and kind of watching it from the founder's point of view, how all this went down, and so I've always kind of like kept mental notes. And I think when I meet founders, I think one of the biggest things that people underinvest in as a founder is understanding narrative and how to tell your story. So a lot of people like if I build a great product and I get it out there, people will just show up. But you can't concisely tell the story of like, why does this need to exist? Why now? Why you? Why, if this works, will it be big? And so I always tell every founder, friend, or in our portfolio, just like focus on narrative. There's actually like structure to it. There's a woman named Nancy Duarte, Duarte. She's written a bunch of books on narrative. She's incredible. She did the Inconvenient Truth deck with Al Gore a long time ago, where they had become famous. She did Apple keynotes for Steve. So she's really accomplished. I highly recommend all of her books because she talks about narrative structure and how to even think about slides and typography and all that stuff. So highly recommend her stuff, but focusing on narrative early because it works with investors. And I always feel like if a founder can't like tell me concisely the narrative of their business, how are you going to hire? Like, how are you going to tell that narrative to employees to convince great people to come work with you? how are you going to tell press and media what your story is to even get it out there as well? So I think it's an underdeveloped and invested skill for founders. And then later, you can't just rely on narrative. Like I would say, there was like story and then evidence. And as you get into like Series A and B, maybe you tell a great story, but if the evidence doesn't back up the story you're telling, then we're in trouble too. And so we'd have founders come in and tell this like amazing story because some people are great at it and they'd get you excited and engaged. And then we'd like dig into the data and we're like, but that just doesn't match up at all. Like people are churning like crazy. And so I think the narrative piece is really important, but then you also have the business that backs it up.
Yeah. Maybe also the timing of the round, right? Like because sometimes you're in the seed stage, you're planning your launch, and then do you raise the A still on the story, on the excitement of the launch, or do you do it post where the metrics might be just like slowly taking off? And
yeah, and I think that the data becomes part of the story. Like you have to have a hook, you have to have a reason, especially later rounds. Seed is purely just kind of story and team. Later rounds, you have to create urgency and you have to create a collection of people and interest around a timing for you to fundraise. And I think a lot of times we'd see a founder come out to fundraise and we'd be like, but why now? Like, why are you trying to fundraise now? And it'd generally be because we're running out of money, but not because the story is there and the timing is there. So a lot of it is trying to figure out what's this point in time where we've proven something new, and new money can be a catapult or a catalyst into getting to that next stage. We talked about this earlier too, but there's also a lot of businesses that don't need venture capital, or it might be the wrong thing. If the size of the industry isn't big enough, venture might not be the right path for you. And I think too many people come in pitching and wanting venture capital because that's the thing they know and hear about, but you got to be really thoughtful with yourself and the type of business you're building if venture is the right tool for you to raise and utilize.
Yeah. I mean, I see the time's up. I feel like we could definitely continue, but I guess everyone also is quite tired. So thank you so much. This was awesome. And thank you all for listening.
I think since Ryan wanted to, he can take one or two audience questions.
Yeah,
since you guys are last, there's nobody who's gonna like kick you off stage.
Are you gonna hand out drinks to everyone while we do this, or
But, we'll have. I think we have an audience. We have a microphone in the audience. So I think maybe like one or two if you wanted to.
Yeah, I can't see really well, so if you see anyone who has a question, if no one has questions, we'll let you go too. But
all
happy
right,
to answer questions.
Anybody wants to have there? I think we have two questions. I've only seen these two people. I'm sure there's more people. But I think we have one over here, and then another one over there, and then we're all good.
Okay.
Hello.
Hello, everyone. Just wanted to ask a question regarding the development of a startup. So when do you think as a founder it is a good idea for you to considering hiring a CEO instead of scaling up? Things are getting out of hand, it's becoming a little bit less messy and more structured, but then it's a different dynamic. So when do you think a founder should start considering letting somebody else take the reins?
Oh, sorry, to essentially have yourself replaced with a new CEO?
Yes.
It's a really, really hard question because it's such an introspective thing to figure out as a founder. But I think you generally start to know if you feel like the skills needed to get the company from here until where you want it to go aren't your best suited and highest use. I think it's a really hard thing for founders to introspectively understand as well, because everyone, of course, you wouldn't start a lot of these businesses if you didn't think you'd get all the way there. But a lot of times the thing that got you to where you are might not be the skills that get you to the next phase. And so I don't think it's I think enough founders don't consider it because it might help the company really succeed. It is sometimes a really hard handoff. But I wouldn't say there's an obvious time specifically in this, like Series A or B or whatever, because it really comes down to when the founder starts to feel like there might be someone better suited for the job to help them do it. And that's a very personal thing to the founder and to the business. So I probably didn't fully answer your question the way you wanted to, but yeah, okay.
Hey there. So basically, I would have like a really, really basic question. I think there are like quite a lot of us here who are like into software development, software developers, like yourself, like you were. Like,
I'm a really bad one now, but yes, yeah.
And I think like it's a really, really interesting idea and something like a black box for us software developers to like kind of understand this switch from like hands-on development to being a VC or going into investments. Can you kind of explain it to us? What would it take for like any software developer to go down that route?
Yep. Yeah, and just to be fair, so I started, as an engineer professionally. That was my job, but my background had really been in I also love design. I would design interfaces, and I love business development and all that. So I had a fairly well-rounded background leading into it. So I was able to be technical enough to lead technical product teams, but really I became, at Twitter was essentially general management, BD, product management. So I wasn't engineering at Twitter anymore. And so I think it's good. There's a few people who are just direct engineers who become pretty good investors. I would say most of the ones I know have gotten more experience in understanding business models, understanding distribution, understanding product development. And so having that more well-rounded view can help. The way I see more just straight up engineers working in venture is in a more specific kind of operating partner role, where they're saying they're really helping them dig into, okay, I know large language models really well. I'll help you guys suss out what's real, what's not. Where do I think tooling is going to go in this market? Here's the tools we use today. There's a big gap in this. That's where I think people with deep technical knowledge can be helpful, and I would say, in general venture capital. Obviously, there's kind of frontier stuff that's super technical where that can work. But I think understanding, because you really need to know business models, what are gross margins? Why do those matter? What type of go-to-market are we going to do? Is it bottoms-up sales, or is it top-down enterprise sales? And so understanding those things are really, really key to helping be a good investor, I think, in assessing businesses. And so I think that's why you don't see a lot of straight-up engineers just leave and then become VCs. It's not impossible, but I think you need that other set of understanding and experiences.
All right.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for sticking around, and feel free to come up and ask questions. Happy to talk more when I see you around.
Thank you, Carolina.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you, Carolina.